Foreign policy. This afternoon, President Biden announced the end of the United States combat mission in Iraq, with American troops now switching to a solely advisory and training role. The news came as the president welcomed there, as you can see in the Oval Office, Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi to the White House. Take a look.
I think things are going well. Our role in Iraq will be as a dealing with it's just to be available, to continue to train, to assist, to help, and to deal with ISIS as it arrives. But we are not going to be, by the end of the year, in a combat mission.
Well, the news from the president comes 18 years after the United States entered Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom. We dug through the archives of those fateful days. Remember back? And if you don't remember, take a look.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening, everyone. This is a special 90-minute edition of World News Tonight, and tonight the world's attention is absolutely fixed on Iraq. We only see a slice of the whole battlefield on television, where there are cameras, specifically Baghdad today, but this was a violent representation of what is happening in many places.
18 years ago. So for a closer look at the future of Iraq and U.S.-Iraqi relations and really what this tells us about where the country's going around the world, let's bring in two veteran reporters in this area. ABC News Chief Global Affairs Correspondent and co-anchor of This Week, Martha Raddatz, and ABC News Senior Foreign Correspondent, Ian Pennell. Thanks both for being here. We're going to draw on your expertise and insight. Martha, you first. So what did you make of the president's meeting with the Iraqi prime minister? News of the U.S. mission changing, coming right after President Biden announced the end to U.S. military operations in Afghanistan.
I think you could have two very different headlines here, Terry. It can be, we are ending combat missions in Iraq, or we're not leaving. And I think this is largely a semantic move. I looked back in the archives as well today and came up with a quote from President Obama in 2014 that said, American forces will not be returning to combat in Iraq, but we will help Iraqis as they take the fight to terrorists. This has long been a train and assist mission. And you can be certain that if American forces come under fire, they will return fire. There will be some sort of force protection and some sort of counterterrorism units acting in Iraq or protecting those troops in some way. We heard Jen Psaki, the White House spokesperson today, ask about how many troops will be in Iraq at the end of the year, and she did not answer that question. But I think the answer to that question, Terry and Diane, is probably the same amount that are there now. I think largely, and I know Ian was there last in Iraq, this is about domestic politics there.
And Ian, the decision in this case, unlike the one in Afghanistan, comes at the urging of the Iraqi government and will still keep troops in the country. Why the difference, and what does that tell you?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Martha. I mean, when is news not news? I think this is a perfect example. I can't really see much of it changing on the ground. I mean, we were there during the battle to retake Mosul. We were embedded with Iraqi special forces. Not once did I see U.S. military troops on the ground. Now, it doesn't mean that special forces weren't there. Of course they were. But in practice, they haven't been actively involved in ground combat for some time. They're generally confined to their bases. 2,500 in a country the size of Iraq doesn't really constitute very much. However, their presence is used by the pro-Iranian militias as a stick, if you like, to try and beat the Iraqi Prime Minister Kadhimi. We're in an election year in Iraq. Parliamentary elections are due to take place in October. So a lot of this is about the militias trying to recast themselves as the resistance, the same way that Hezbollah in Lebanon casts itself as the resistance. What are you actually resisting the country? Well, we're resisting American military presence. In practice, American military presence is hugely important to the Iraqi military, especially when it comes to ISIS. It's been absolutely instrumental in overthrowing ISIS in the country or diminishing it to its current state of an insurgency. But other than that, its training, its assistance, its logistical, its intelligence support are key to the Iraqi military and the Iraqi government. But other than that, they're not out there patrolling the streets or doing anything like that. Kadhimi has a real problem with the pro-Iranian militias. They were set up as an independent military force in 2014 under a fatwa issued by Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, who's a leading Shia cleric in Iraq. They were successful in taking the battle to ISIS. Remember, the Iraqi military ran away. That's why US troops were sent back into the country. But now they've become too powerful a force. And there's going to be a real headache for the Iraqi government going forward about how they try and contain that. Martha's right. If the American forces are attacked, they will respond. They'll continue in the country. And I suspect that the militias will continue to use their presence, combat or not, again, as a stick to try and win parliamentary seats, to try and beat the current government. But I think there are real problems ahead. I think the prospect of conflict between these Iraqi pro-Iranian militias and the Iraqi regular forces is something that a lot of people are deeply concerned about.
And I remember, Ian, when I was there when ISIS swept into the country, and the flag that those Iranian, pro-Iranian militias flew was not the Iraqi flag, it was the Iranian flag. And Martha, you've covered this story in Iraq extensively over the years. The U.S. entered the country in 2003 under the pretense of a hunt for weapons of mass destruction that was presented by the President George W. Bush, and to spread and establish democracy there. So 18 years later, what have we accomplished? And I remember Colin Powell saying, you break it, you buy it phrase. Was that true?
Well, I think one of the things, Terry, in particular, as you guys both pointed out, we have just announced, President Biden just announced that we're pulling out of Afghanistan completely. And there is great worry about that because of the people who helped us, because of those interpreters, because of those people who stood by the Americans. What happens to them now? What happens to that country? And the same question was always throughout Iraq. The lesson that many people say about Afghanistan is, didn't they learn from Iraq? When U.S. forces, as Ian said, you have said, pulled out of there completely. I was on the last convoy out of Iraq in 2011. And even at the time, it was very worrisome about what would happen to that country. And we all know that ISIS came back. And that quote I read earlier from President Obama was in 2014, talking about sending troops back into Iraq. So I think the combination of seeing the reaction to Afghanistan, the reaction to pulling out all those troops, and what happened to Iraq in 2014 when ISIS rolled back in has really given the administration pause. The Pentagon certainly wants to keep a presence there. It's about intelligence. It's about keeping a presence on the ground that many said, had they done that in 2011, they might have had a clue, a bigger clue, that ISIS was coming back in 2014. So I think it's a cautious thing to do. I think they're helping domestic politics, but I do think some of those militias are going to figure out what's going on in there.
And Ian, when you look at this announcement coupled with the Afghanistan announcement, what does that tell you about how President Biden is trying to tackle foreign policy?
Look, it's well known that President Biden, certainly in terms of Afghanistan, was against the surge. He didn't want that increase in American troops in Afghanistan and wanted to draw them down. So I don't think it was any great shock that he decided to go ahead and order the full withdrawal, even though some of the consequences on the ground are unraveling rapidly, as Martha said, right now. And in Iraq, similarly, President Biden, I remember him writing an op-ed, I think in the Washington Post or the New York Times when I was based there in Baghdad, arguing for the splitting of the country into 3 separate zones to try and deal with what he saw as an inevitable civil war there. So I think we're seeing a president seeing a foreign policy stance that says, look, this isn't the policy of old. We don't want to invade countries, put boots on the ground when they're not wanted, getting involved in never-ending wars and conflicts. But also we know that the administration wants to recalibrate its attention away from the Middle East and towards Asia, towards China, towards Russia. But welcome to the reality of politics and foreign affairs. Events on the ground tend to speak for themselves, and whatever it is you think are the emerging threats and the ones you need to refocus on. Again, the Obama administration talked about refocusing on the Pacific. The Middle East has a habit of drawing administrations back in. We've seen this for decades and decades, and even though this will be a change of mission, it'll be presented as the end of the combat mission there, the end of the combat mission in Afghanistan, it doesn't mean the end of the problems in both those countries.
Our longest wars by far. ABC's Martha Raddatz and Ian Pennell. Thanks very much.
That.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.